Hello. Our story begins inside the Jedi Temple. 16-year-old Padawan Anakin Skywalker was seated inside the archives. He had been in here for the past 4 hours or so doing absolutely nothing. Obi Wan was putting him in a timeout for being scandalous or something. From Anakin's perspective, hiding Yoda's cane wasn't that big of a deal, but Kenobi was too strict as it was in his mind. Anakin made unrhythmic beats with his hammer thumbs and sat idly taking deep breaths every few moments like someone would pity him. A big sigh here, a big yawn there, and nothing. All these actions were for reaction, and he wasn't getting that. He was getting bored, so he opened up the tablet in front of him and began aimlessly scanning around. This time inside the archives should have been used for personal growth and meditation. Instead, it was arguing with Obi Wan inside of his head. The type of argument you have in the shower a day after the original argument ended type of thing. Just being frustrated at the situation, wishing that he used this dig rather than that one, and said this rather than that. The simple troubles of a 16-year-old rebel inside the Jedi Order. Then he came back to something he had considered a little while before. What if he left the Jedi Order? Well, he could, theoretically speaking. In his mind, that was kind of a good idea. He could have his freedom. He would lose his status, though, which in his mind was very important to have. At the top of the feed were articles about the Republic's growing stance of hostility against the Outer Rim. They didn't maintain any territory, well, hardly any territory, in that part of the galaxy, so it wasn't something that they really wanted to dive in after. Chancellor Palpatine held his reserves about the Outer Rim, but the silence was just as loud as those who supported the alienation of the entire quadrant, aside from the few planets that were still inside of the Republic. While Anakin hated politics and loathed reading about them, this did interrupt his train of thought. His mother, his home world, the one he hated so much, was out there. Tatooine was one of those worlds that was being excluded. Skywalker had plenty of reason to be upset with the Jedi Order for their lack of enthusiasm about going into the Outer Rim. But truth be told, upon realizing this, maybe it wasn't all their fault after all. The Order, while spanning the galaxy, was only 10,000 strong, a quarter of which weren't even knights, if that many. This was in comparison to a Galactic Republic with hundreds of trillions of sentients that live within it. Maybe, and this was a big maybe, a big brain thought, maybe the Jedi Order wasn't actually responsible for taking on the entire Hutt syndicate alone. Maybe there were other things that the Jedi could do while still being helpful, without of course excluding everyone to focus on one task. If the Order went to the Outer Rim, they might be able to influence change, but there was no guarantee that the Senate would back them. They would expose weaknesses in the mid-rim, inner rim, and core, not to mention the potential of Hutt space expansion on the eastern side of the galactic map. Anakin then crafted an idea. He could change that. If he revoked his status as a Jedi, he could become a senator for Tatooine and change things for the better. This was not a well-conceived plan, and it played out that way. Similar in fashion to Anakin hiding Yoda's cane, he abandoned the Jedi Order and went to the Senate, proclaiming that he was the representative of Tatooine, here to demand freedom for his people. The boy was laughed out of session. It was so embarrassing. The entire Senate erupted into perpetual laughter when quote-unquote young representative from Tatooine took the stand. What made it worse was what little Palpatine did. He couldn't exactly do anything, even though he wanted to for the sake of his future plans. But if he did, it would backfire on him for doing anything remotely for Anakin. He just had to kind of let this play out. This poorly conceived plan didn't go without its upside either. Anakin believed he could just become a senator and that would work. Technically, he wasn't wrong, which was the worst part about it, but the Senate would never recognize him as a senator or representative, especially not of Tatooine, without proper change. Due to the planet belonging to the Hutts, Skywalker needed to prove that the people on the planet were capable of being worthy of being a part of the Galactic Republic. Even more woefully, Palpatine would have to accept Tatooine into the ranks of said republic, which was something he would never do due to his own plans for civil war. Though that previously referenced plus side was what Anakin stole. With Obi Wan trying to figure out how to appropriately handle Anakin's punishment, he snuck into the Jedi stockpile and transferred 100,000 Republic credits to himself, and then pulled all those credits out of his account before going to the Senate building. So yeah, he was laughed out of the Senate, but he still had some money to his name, which in his mind, 100,000 was a lot. It wasn't. He could buy maybe a good starship and get some fuel to get from Tatooine to here, and enough credits left over to pay for food, which wouldn't last him more than a month or two on Coruscant, and it wouldn't do him any good on Tatooine because they didn't use Republic currency, but it was 100,000 credits, right? With his failure already out of the way, Anakin went to a ship lot and purchased a YV-664 light freighter. It was used, but lightly so. More of a collector's item for an old head in the economic district. The man had passed away and the family sold off some of his stuff, which meant that Anakin could play treasure hunt with his new ship. In hidden compartments were thousands of credits just lying around. The man was a high roller, and he liked to keep some spending money away from his next of kin, or the savages that were referred to by the outside world as children. To him, they were people waiting for him to die. But that was a story beyond Anakin's own comprehension at the moment. With the ship collected, he went to the Outer Rim and began his ride to superstardom, so he could become that senator of Tatooine. He hadn't yet realized how challenging this would be. His rash decision had bitten him in the backside, and yet he was way too stubborn to just give up now. What would he do? Go back to the temple as a failure? As someone who just got laughed out of the Senate chambers? Go back to the people that already laughed at him for being a slave to his emotions? No! He would go back and rub his success in their arrogant faces. But he needed to start somewhere. How or where was the issue? He took a deep dive on his way to Tatooine, on how to start a political campaign. But there was a remaining issue. On the HoloNet, these articles were lessons on how to craft a campaign in Republic-established worlds. While their processes were all different to varying degrees, the theme was the same. Tatooine was not under such a government. It was ruled by the daimyo, one with absolute power and one of the most powerful beings in the Outer Rim, leaving Anakin with one question: how? When he eventually landed inside of his hometown, the question loomed over his head like a cloud. He felt encircled by the shroud of darkness and he didn't know how to escape it. Anakin walked from the ramp and found an individual waiting for their pay. Anakin tried to give Republic credits, but that didn't work, and the individual working the hangar bay told him that he would have 3 days to give him the credits to pay for these days, or he'd be sent to Jabba and have his money ripped out of him. Anakin nodded his head and scurried away from the hangar. This was generous, but the man did believe that if Anakin didn't pay up, then he could have his well-maintained freighter, so why even bother getting the payment? The kid probably stole it as it was. It was free money for the hangar operator either way. This was the business of Mos Espa, a business that was encouraged by one of the most powerful crime families in the galaxy, a family whose most powerful leader basked under the twin suns of dusty old Tatooine. Anakin attempted to copy some routines he had seen from politicians on other worlds. He didn't have a political presence, and he didn't have a campaign direction. All he could say was, he wanted to bring Tatooine into the Republic. And the question is, do you think that worked well? Because it didn't. These people didn't want to be represented by a corrupt government. They were fine being comfortably uncomfortable under the Hutts, because that's what those slugs told them was the right thing to believe. It was horrid manipulation of a group of people that had been cast aside not even by choice. Anakin's continued failures were necessary. They destroyed his morale and crippled any sense of stubborn motivation he had left. But by the time the third day rolled around, he had at the very least gathered enough credits up to fund for his parking inside the hangar bay. So this was proof that good people would listen. Just to ease Anakin's mind, he made sure that all the credits that were donated out of pure pity were set aside in Republic currency so that it all went back to the people of Tatooine. That, in his mind, was very important. A credit for a credit system. Every donation they gave went right back to them. He had searched for his mother, but he never got a chance to go out and visit her. So, with his 3 days up, that's what he did. At the Lars homestead out past Anchorhead, he reunited with his mother and met the Lars family, a group of moisture farmers that lived off the land and paid tribute to the daimyo. It wasn't an easy life, but with as many members to their family as this, they were able to make it by on scraps. Anakin asked some questions about things that a Jedi shouldn't be that interested in, but he wasn't one of those anymore, explaining what his true purpose on Tatooine was. Anakin was excited about the prospect of doing something huge with his life here, and taking it in a direction that could positively impact the lives of those he abandoned all those years ago. The biggest inspiration for him was his mother, but on top of that, it was the Lars family themselves. This inspiration was because he had realized something. In his discussions with Klieg Lars, he learned about how miserable their lives had become. Anakin suggested mounting up, and while that was a sound idea, Jabba had scared off the other moisture farmers. There were movements in the past, definitely, but the bigger farms were bought off by the Hutts, and then the smaller ones lost power. Of course, as Klieg laughed in remarks, the Hutts didn't even know how to run those farms, so they were put out of commission just as quickly as they were bought. Their facilities deteriorated, and the other farms themselves were bled dry in a matter of weeks because of their inconsistent farming techniques. Klieg was disappointed by this at the time, but told Anakin that there were no more large farms, so Anakin suggested coming together and forming a unit. Klieg asked if he meant a union, and young Skywalker nodded. The elder Lars was a bit too worried about this. The last time a proper union formed on the planet, the Hutts flogged them until death, publicly. While Shmi wouldn't like this answer, it was a one-of-a-kind answer to be expected from Anakin. He told Klieg that he would run as their face. Any punishment given to the Union would come down on his back instead of theirs. Klieg asked why he was doing this. It didn't make sense. He had the perfect life on Coruscant with the Jedi, and Anakin said that Tatooine needed representation within the Republic. If they could get it, they could change the lives of trillions of beings. The Outer Rim was controlled by rival criminal syndicates and families. Anakin suggested if they could unionize, then perhaps they could garner more support from the massive cities. Klieg patted Anakin on the shoulder, walking away and telling the young man that he had wishful thinking. He supported him, truly. If Shmi loved Anakin, and she did, Klieg loved him too. But this was an uphill battle, one that would be nearly impossible. Anakin understood this, but he had a plan brewing. It wasn't much, but it was something. He disappeared into his YV freighter and began flying out to the multitude of moisture farmers across the planet. He didn't hit every single one of them, but he started communicating, understanding their desires, and things that would make their lives easier. These individuals, per Anakin's instruction, started getting into contact with their neighbors, buddies, and even rivals, and he started finding new sources of interactions. This came in the form of cantinas, Jawas, and other lines of work, like mechanical work, or food service type of stuff. These were the main focuses on Tatooine. There was education, but with all the slavery, it was more of homeschooling. Anakin could also really appeal to these people because he was a slave that was born on and around Tatooine. He could capitalize off of his past, and if he could mobilize a political movement, he could compete with the Hutts, and he believed he would. See, Anakin's plan wasn't to war with the crime family. Their ties to incredible wealth was their strength. Power and wealth was all that mattered to this family of slugs, and Jabba, at the helm here at Tatooine, could only be driven away if the Prophet wasn't there. The power was, and he kept a tight grip on it, but if these people unionized against him and proved to Coruscant that they could do something on their own, then maybe the Republic would side with their cause. This was risky, and Anakin knew it, but he, after gaining a list of individuals, union ideas, and of course some requirements people had for supporting such a decision, he departed for Coruscant. Anakin wanted to legitimize his movement, proving to the Senate itself that they had a true claim for a chance to become part of the Republic. Yes, they were far from Coruscant, but Rhodia, not more than a jump away, was a part of the Republic. If they could make it, so could Tatooine. Skywalker was dying doing this. He hated the research side of things, but the personable aspect was where he thrived. Meeting citizens, workers, and people who did the everyday jobs of slaving away gave him the motivation to continue this task. He did have true anxiety about returning to the Galactic Senate, but it had been a couple months since then. His time with Klieg, Shmi, and the multitude of individuals and businesses across Tatooine really helped him understand what he needed to do and how important his movement was. Also, it was worth mentioning that Anakin gained intelligent confidence. Inside the temple, he believed he was inadequate in the study sessions, but that wasn't it. It was more the fact that he had spent 9 years without formal education and was trying to rapidly keep up. Obviously, at 16, still, he was closer to where many of his peers were, but he still felt inadequate inside the temple. Out here, he was giving inspiration, and that was more than enough to him. His speech inside the Senate wouldn't receive a total annihilation of laughs and mockery because he did come prepared this time, though this did not mean he had gained their respect. Their laughs had turned into eye rolls, the pretentious type that had become associated with core-like folks, who pretended the Outer Rim was irrelevant or not real. Palpatine again seemed mute upon Anakin's discussions. They had a semi-formed bond before Anakin abandoned the Order, but now he wasn't feeling so inclined to trust the Chancellor. Anakin not only communicated to the Senate, but with a couple members of a pro-Outer Rim delegation. These early allies supported him and gave him some interesting concepts that might be worth his time upon his return to Tatooine. Anakin was grateful for the new allies he created inside the Galactic Republic, but there was one more, one who asked that he come back to Rhodia with him. Skywalker instantly trusted the man, because after all, he was one of Padme's mentors in the past. Anaconda Farr and Anakin would return to the senatorial district on Rhodia and discuss more options moving forward. Farr believed that what Anakin set out to accomplish was brave and should be commemorated, but until it wasn't, he wanted to help. This was both out of kindness but also political advantages for himself. While Farr was a kind mentor who mentored young and aspiring minds, the more selfish side of these mentorship programs was to aid young and growing senators into allies in the future. He planned on making a run for the Chancellor's seat, but it would be impossible without aid. However, Anakin was a unique example. It was almost impossible for any senator to push for a vote of no confidence against Supreme Chancellor, which is why Palpatine had Padme do it against Valorum. An individual that was not truly a part of the Senate as a representative or senator could though. Anakin, without true protection from the Republic, needed to gain favorability within the Senate. Unluckily, strategically, that might not work. The Senate was filled to the brim with bureaucrats, ones that sold their souls out to credits and business monopolies. An individual like Anakin could completely upset the status quo. Farr, as an experienced politician, could manipulate the conversation so young Skywalker saw Palpatine for who he really was. But it was not told to him directly. Anaconda made sure that it was Anakin who pieced everything together. It was a strategic way to show Anakin why things were the way they were, who was supporting the corporate mind, and even those wealthier than them. While Palpatine was far removed from the Hutts, think of him as the Jabba of the Republic. There were good people in and around him, but their voices were not audible. They were subjugated to so much, and they were forced to change themselves to stay in power, which meant their original core motives were lost. And that was the lesson. Anakin couldn't believe it. As he put everything together, he continued adding more to his plan for forging a true government on Tatooine. Though what was started here on Rhodia was truly special in his mind, and he promised Anaconda that he would keep in close contact with them, which was appreciated from the new ally. When Anakin returned to Tatooine, there was a slight buzz, but it would need to be more to get this movement going. Skywalker would spend the next several months using anything he could get his hands on to splurge with credits and add to whatever it was he was trying to prove he would assist. Whether it was education unions or proper defenses from the Hutts, he was doing it, though these attempts got the attention of the daimyo. The issue is, Jabba wasn't the only one looking for Skywalker. Obi Wan, shortly after his student abandoned the Order, chased him across the stars, searching for him everywhere. Dooku had been assigned to do the same thing, but the Jedi task force that Kenobi brought with him, and the smugglers and bounty hunters hired by Dooku, couldn't find Anakin. These were narrow misses too, which was the irony in all of it. Like Anakin was at a certain cantina and finished eating a couple minutes before the Jedi walked in to not find him. Obi-Wan never stopped his search though, neither did Dooku. But this tore Obi-Wan's heart apart, knowing that Anakin left angrily and was all alone in such a big galaxy. Kenobi vowed to find him and bring him home. Jabba, on the other hand, had a much wider wingspan on Tatooine than the Jedi or Dooku, so he was able to intimidate Anakin. This little game was fun for him, but he planned on showing the young wannabe up. However, this intimidation came with Anakin's own version of it. Within the months since speaking to a number of moisture farmers planet-wide, he had formed a union at 87% capacity of all farmers. There were 13% who were absolutely terrified of the Hutts, but the rest, they were angry. Jabba threatened the moisture farmer union, telling them that they could lose out on their very generous cut. The Hutts established a deal with the moisture farmers. The farmers made 35 cents on every credit, so not a whole lot. The Hutts made the rest, plus the profit. There was a reason the moisture families were living on tight budgets, needing as much help as they could get to make by. The Moisture Union, with Anakin's guidance, told Jabba that they would burn all their farms to the ground in a state of protest against the slug. They would lose out on their wealth, yes, but the cost would be much worse for the Hutts themselves. Without the farmers, they would lose their profit on Tatooine, and they'd be forced to bring water from off-world to maintain their grip on the planet. Realistically, they wouldn't, and they would have to abandon it so they could return to Nal Hutta. But Jabba didn't want to surrender his territory. Anakin used this very small bartering with Jabba as everything to propel his political career. This didn't make Anakin any safer. The criminal leader wanted him dead. and now there were bounty hunters searching for him. Even luckier, a really wealthy businessman from Mos Espa who had connections to the Trade Federation through family relations and investments threw a couple million credits at Anakin and even funded him with a proper security detail. Anakin truthfully appreciated the security he had, though after breaking the will of the Hutt crime family temporarily, Anakin had to make another trip back to Coruscant, this time as a 17-year-old. With the walls closing in on him at Tatooine, surviving shootouts with bounty hunters and smugglers, as well as avoiding attacks from local gangs trying to claim bounties on his head, Anakin needed to return to Coruscant with his evidence. That, at the very least, was all he needed to do with his life. In the months leading up to his 17th birthday, he was able to increase the bracket of moisture union up to 91%, but it was constantly capped at that, because the other farms were bought out by the Hutts. Luckily for Anakin, thanks to his early work in speaking with what would become his constituents, he was able to form unions in the meantime. With the Hutts focused on the moisture union, a labor union was started with the Jawas, and it monopolized planet-wide, because those little guys know each other. And then, that labor union spread into cities, branching off into different variations. It was pretty brilliant in his own mind. With how little teachers there were, he was able to present a teacher union very quickly as well. Anakin knew all of this was relatively arbitrary, but he was stat padding. He needed some form of presentation, and he had it here with this. Proof that the people wanted change and proof that he needed an alliance with the Republic to break the will of the Hutts. Anakin had even gotten some locals to strike up deals with non-violent Tusken tribes to guard the perimeter of moisture farms. Since the Tuskens were pretty barbaric, it gave the farmers a chance to be safe, and allowed for more violent clans to avoid territory. While these violent Tuskens could be terrible, the threat of other tribes mounting up or setting up permanent camp told those violent tribes be wary of potential attacks near moisture farm territory. The raiders who bartered with Skywalker were also receiving their own form of payment for the time being, something that was essential to them, water. The moisture union was a little wary of it, but it was necessary for the time being. Regardless, the young attempting to become senator moved from Tatooine to Coruscant so that he could address the Senate with his stats and provide another case of interest. He had his proof that Tatooine was properly ready for change, and after being laughed out of the Senate nearly twice, he came back a third time with a vengeance. Anakin was wronged. Tatooine was forced into the back of people's minds, and the complacency of the Republic was at fault for it. He stopped by Rhodey to pick up Senator Farr, who was finishing up his vacation. Also with them was Shmi and a couple Union heads, a Jawa, who was a mechanic, a Weequay bar owner, and a Celestian teacher. Anakin spoke mostly with the Union heads and Anaconda Farr during the duration of the trip to Coruscant, which was fine. Shmi was just here to support her son. They planned out a speech that was truthfully mostly written by Anaconda, but it was Anakin's words, just refined into court dialect, something that would appease the minds of people in the Senate. While they were talking and planning out this speech, Anakin asked about Padme, and Anaconda smiled, telling him that she would be in attendance, but first, focus on the speech, and maybe they could set something up after it was finished. Anaconda also walked Anakin through some potential scenarios where the Senate banded together with him, or they did what they had done before. He was very adamant that he needed to stand his ground either way. The senators were ruthless. Anakin agreed. He was truthfully very nervous. This was the time to get it right. Anaconda reminded Anakin that he had to be wary. If he went the last route, it would be do or die for Tatooine. Palpatine made the right people happy, and that was all that mattered for re-election. But if Skywalker could disrupt that status quo, then there was a chance that something could be changed or influenced. But Anaconda warned it could jeopardize his people and his entire political career. It was a last option because it was all or nothing. When they arrived inside the Senate chambers, Anakin wore a new cloak, one outfitted by Senator Farr's stylist. He was presented in core standards, with people that did not make the mark, which was intended. Anakin made his way to the podium and slid out to the middle of the massive building. This was his third time. Anakin was visibly nervous. His index finger was digging at the corner of his thumb, ripping up skin, and his other hand was grasping the actual podium itself until his knuckles were pale. His eyes scanned the first few words of his speech, and they caught in his throat. A representative from the Trade Federation mockingly told the representative from Tatooine to take the stand. Anakin looked up and began his speech, slipping over the first two words and starting over. He wished he could have that back, but as he was reeling in embarrassment, he saw his mother from the corner of his eyes. A happiness washed over him. He had this. He could do this. A smile formed and he apologized, making a joke out of it, telling the Senate that after being laughed out of here 2 times, he apparently still had not recovered. A chuckle formed in the audience as he started again, straightening his back and stiffening his voice. He spoke to the people, identifying their cause for being here, telling them that with only a few short months, he was able to bring together unions and threaten Jabba the Hutt and the crime family he was a part of. If he was able to accomplish that on Tatooine, then it was accomplishable throughout the entire Outer Rim. His case was for fair representation inside the halls of the Galactic Republic, but he pointed out that there was so little in the Outer Rim. Thanks to Anaconda, he knew that there were business monopolies with representation inside the Senate. They liked Palpatine. However, if Anakin could find the incentive to get them more power, then he could gain their trust. What Anaconda helped Anakin with was political manipulation. Earn the sympathy of the Senate. Earn credits from the businesses. While unions wouldn't be the biggest friend of someone like the Trade Federation, Anakin made a point. Tatooine was massive, and it was in need of proper business. This wasn't selling his people out to the Republic, and he said that, but it was foregoing adherence to a system that benefited no one so that they could expand the minds of a generation so desperate for representation, expand the hearts of a planet that would work harder than any system in the Galactic Republic, because these people had seen slavery, they had seen oppression, and they had lived with fear. Hungry people work harder because they know what it's like to starve, and they would never want that again. He let the others with him have a chance to speak, and then he finished up their talks with a rallying cry. If a 17-year-old boy from Tatooine could rally a movement against one of the most powerful gangsters in the galaxy, if that kid could move mountains, then the Republic should have no problem moving what should only be considered to them a molehill. When he stepped back, the Senate erupted, and Anakin took a deep breath. The fight was not over yet, but it felt relieving for now. Palpatine addressed the Senate, and as per Anaconda's fears, the Chancellor called his movement a sympathetic one, but not a feasible one. There were too many risks involved. He tried to play the safe side, but because Anakin put money into the eyes of the businesses, Palpatine was left without his biggest allies. What Anakin said was true. The Outer Rim was untapped territory to exploit people. The Federation, Commerce Guild, and banking clans, as well as some of the others, could get cheap labor in the Outer Rim. They could multiply their factories and upscale their production output. Anakin did have a plan for this, and he didn't specifically say they could do that, but he put that idea into their minds. His main goal, personally, was to form unions, just in the sweet spots, so that none of that could happen to his people or people around the Outer Rim. All he needed was the support to make Tatooine a planet of the Republic. Betraying the business conglomerates didn't concern him as of yet. So this came back to the main issue, one that Palpatine steamrolled, referring to Anakin as a brave soul for coming so far to assert a stance for his people, but it would not work. On Tatooine, millions of people felt the air leave their lungs as they watched the Republic betray them yet again, and watched Palpatine tell Anakin that he was brave, but better luck next time. Anakin stood up after he heard this, telling the Chancellor that he understood that Palpatine feared risks. But the risk for Anakin's own people were too great. A hologram came up, showing Anakin and a squad of security detail in the middle of a shootout. Skywalker was behind a wall as they fought off the attackers. While yes, Anakin was a Jedi and had Jedi training, he needed to earn the sympathy, even if that meant sacrificing his guards. It killed him on the inside, but they were necessary deaths, ones for the greater good of Tatooine. On another hologram, he showed a transport of his that was destroyed by a bounty hunter sent by the Hutts. This wasn't sympathetic. He didn't want Palpatine's pity, he wanted his action. So Anakin spoke again, interrupting Palpatine, expressing that while this inaction didn't directly affect the Republic now, it could. Under Palpatine's administration, he had given the crime families consistent rule of the Outer Rim. While this wasn't new, Anakin didn't elaborate on that. He told the people of the Chambers that if these families continued gaining strength, they would drown out the hardworking people that made this movement work, the hardworking people who made any movement work on any of the systems forgotten by this chamber. He called to them, reminding them of their civic duty to their people, what their actions did for those hurt by poverty or hurt by crime, how they can not only help people on their own worlds, but turn the greater galaxy into a system that is intergalactic, one that no longer allowed slavery or allowed criminal families built on generational wealth to sustain strength. And with such a riveting response, he called for a vote of no confidence in Supreme Chancellor Palpatine's leadership. All the air in the Senate chambers was taken out of the room. But because Anakin had mentioned the Trade Federation businessman from Mos Espa, The first group to side with Tatooine was, in fact, the sleazy Trade Federation. Anaconda, despite the potential ramifications this could have on his career, supported immediately. His allies rallied with him. And then another caucus. Wookiees and their allies joined the vote. Another business conglomerate followed in the steps of the Trade Federation, and it continued winding around for the Chancellor. Anakin had given the people a rallying cry, just enough to bite on, and he had their support. It wasn't going to be easy. Palpatine established strong roots in the Senate. But when Naboo turned on him, some of the swing voters felt desire to pull back. The truth is, some planets had alliances with those affected by the syndicates, and some affected by the illegal slave trade. Allies of the Wookiees, Twi'leks, and other mid-rim and outer rim worlds saw Anakin's point. He was right. These illegal slave trades needed to be stopped, which was echoed by the representative from Kashyyyk, who supported Anakin immediately, informing him and the Senate that they would volunteer a fighting force of 1,500 Wookiees to go to Tatooine and assist this new movement, insisting that the Republic remove Palpatine so real change could impact those who had been neglected under his rule. Once the business monopolies flipped, it was really over. The Trade Federation, even after Naboo, had a lot of influence. Padme wasn't siding with the Federation, she was siding with Anakin, the boy she tried so hard to help. She had been back to Tatooine to free Shmi, but she was gone. Seeing that she was alright warmed Padme's heart. The session would come to an end, and Palpatine's power would slip out from under him, reaching the margin by just enough to force him out of office, making Anakin's motion successful. He then had a reuniting with Padme, which was beautiful all around, but she was interested in speaking business, which Anakin sadly had to be interested in as well, despite his personal desires with her. Skywalker, Amidala, and Farr made sure that they had their plans set out before Anakin returned to Tatooine. They wanted to send him extra aid, but there were some other conversations that needed to be held, especially around Anakin's resilience in the Senate chambers. Truthfully, the establishment of a government on Tatooine would be necessary as a step forward, and Anakin had to tread lightly. Corporations would desire property and economic control over a recovering system, which is why Farr believed they sided with him over Palpatine, Farr being right with his belief. With an extra security detail consisting of Rodians, combined Naboo guards, Wookiees, and a couple other generous donors, Anakin returned to Tatooine. This was a brilliant political play for his people. He didn't wait around on Coruscant to see who the next Chancellor was, and the people respected this about him. It wasn't at all intentional, he just simply didn't care. But he returned with a force ready to bring democracy to the desolate world of Tatooine. Jabba had forces prepared to counter them, but Anakin announced that he did not want conflict to erupt. He was going to bring this system to its knees by forming a true democracy. Individuals interested in the politics of the situation also went to Tatooine to help establish a government, while members of the corporate bodies went to scout out locations to begin construction for the expansion of their monopolized powers. Jabba decided to go with Cold War tactics. He could squash the resistance with force, but instead, he would use his best tactics. A slug, a gangster who cheated to win everything, born with generational wealth. He wouldn't cower. He knew he could win a fraudulent election, one that he could rig himself, one that would affirm his rule. If Skywalker wanted to play fairly, then this would be unfair. The individuals who came to defend Anakin were surprised by what they saw. Anakin could only say so much about his home world without sounding like he was trashing it, but it truthfully built up sympathy for him and his movement. Padme and Anaconda were integral to assisting the people of Tatooine with establishing a government. However, Jabba himself made a public appearance to commemorate this remarkable day, insisting that this would be a vote that could win over the public of Tatooine, one showing who was truly deserving of their respect. For weeks, hostilities would continue to grow between them, but nothing would bubble over. With representatives from Coruscant coming to certify everything, it slowly became an uphill battle for Jabba, and for citizens of the planet, hope started to rise. Anakin's name was now a household one, and he flourished in the public eye. He was a little nervous about everything, but the population of Tatooine was rallying. In the meantime, his wealthy investor friend, while being in tandem with the Federation, warned Anakin of what would come if he won. The Federation would swarm this planet, and he needed to ensure the people were ready, which put Anakin in a tight spot. Too many promises to too many people, and he didn't want to disappoint. This is where Padme came in. Because of how stressful everything was at the moment, Anakin couldn't chase his personal desires, and it was the true friendship of Padme that made him appreciate her more than he ever had. She was a guiding hand, helping him navigate through something he had never been prepared for. Meanwhile, on Coruscant, a new Supreme Chancellor was taking office, in the form of Tarson Chancellor Rabish. He was a neutral face in the crowd, a late election year riser, someone who snuck into the ballot and rose exponentially after a tie formed between the two leading candidates. Rabish was able to rise into the position to become the first Tarsonet Chancellor since Drellic. In his leadership, Rabish himself would go to Tatooine to certify the results of this election, one that had been kept on a tight leash with Republic influence everywhere. With the Supreme Chancellor came a sector authority fleet from Iridium, and a couple other volunteer forces to ensure protection for the Chancellor, senators, and hopeful new administration of the Tatooine government. Jabba for the first time in his life felt true worry, and even more than that, threatened and intimidated. They were actually here, and they proved him wrong, and that's because Rabish had upset the status quo, just as Anakin did. Their desire for change led to this, and Anakin challenged Jabba up front and told him to return to his world and leave Tatooine alone. It was time for a real, united change to take over this planet, led by the people who built it, and not those who were lazy slugs sucking on hookah sticks all day. Anakin was young, maybe even too young, in some people's eyes, but he was the right person. He did not buckle to the threats of the crime family. The election began, and as quickly as it did, it ended. Jabba's thieves and bounty hunters had gone to change things, but many of them had changed their minds, realizing that, as locals of Tatooine, this would benefit all of them. Jabba would continue subjugating them. Anakin would not. Those who didn't shrivel away from their jobs fought the armed guard and died or were captured. This left no one to change the results, and no one to stop the overwhelming call for change. With the certification of Anakin's leadership as Senator of Tatooine, was Chancellor Rabish's welcoming of the system into the Galactic Republic. There was a new governor of the planet as well, that would work in tandem with Skywalker, and a new system, one set up by Far and Amidala. The beginning of a new era had commenced. Tatooine's acceptance into the Republic wasn't just jarring for Anakin, but overwhelmingly positive. He never honestly expected to go the distance. From being laughed out of the Senate itself to returning to Coruscant as Senator of Tatooine, he felt called to serve his people. Finally, at the culmination of his power, would he see Obi Wan again? And it was bittersweet. But Kenobi didn't want Anakin to feel anything other than joy. He had set out to accomplish something, and he did. That's all Kenobi could ask of his former pupil, and Anakin was happy. On the eve of their victory, Skywalker and Amidala would spend all night talking. They were speaking on political strategies and movements forward. The stress was semi-gone, and it was much more relaxing of an environment. And yes, Anakin still longed for a relationship here. But there was something more, something that he craved, that he actually thrived off of. He wanted validation, and he had it. Padme gave him validation because she truly respected his grit. Most people would have given up, but he didn't. That was a testament to his character. All this validation gave him the confidence to put his emotions for her to the side for the moment and enjoy the comfort of being accepted. What followed was the actual work. The Republic military forces refused to leave Tatooine until the Hutts did, which was good. But the actual work wasn't nearly as fun as a campaign. Anakin's campaign was difficult work, but he strived to make it successful. But running a political office wasn't about saying things, it was doing them. Jabba and his thugs were gone by week 1. Big accomplishment. The unions formed and created a strong united body with Anakin's leadership. Huge accomplishment. With Republic forces present, they began a monthly push to transfer into the Republic economy. After that month ended, it was done. Big accomplishment. The best part is, in Anakin's mind about working on a planet that was so desecrated, is that it would be especially hard for him to lose favor. But they also had themselves a miniature sandbox to work with, so they had a lot they could do. The Federation donor wanted one thing from Anakin, which was a casino. It was a difficult thing because budget restraints, but Anakin was able to do a little switch up on the donor. Anakin's efforts went into a local academy, a K-12, that was built in the middle of multiple cities. On the flip side, there was a 4-year plan for a new tourist destination that would take time to create. Anakin had a great plan, and that was his promise to the Federation man. Due to alliances with the Tuscans, he was able to learn of a geyser that was bubbling with water in the Dune Sea. It was far removed from civilization, but he planned on cutting a deal with the Moisture Union. He would split the water equally, turn it into a huge tourist destination, a pool area and a casino, promising the donor a facility that would garner attraction and credits. Gambling was also allowed in the new constitution. What became the biggest challenge was delegating time on Coruscant and time on Tatooine. He wasn't just a part of the Republic, but a new member of the delegation of 2000. All the while, despite Anakin's efforts to change the course of history on Tatooine, Dooku and Palpatine were forming their own issues. Count Dooku had become quite evil since his execution of Yaddle. He murdered, cheated, and was controlled by Sith greed. But the change within the Republic was dangling keys in his face. He wanted to help people, that was the core to who he was. And with Palpatine trying to get Dooku into political power, which he lost out to Supreme Chancellor Rabish, arguments continued getting out of hand between the two Sith. Palpatine wanted Dooku to push the galaxy closer to civil war. But why do that? The change was coming, and instead of being on the wrong side, Dooku's funds and credits could be used for good. In a meeting with his master, a duel ensued, one that Palpatine could not anticipate. Dooku had superior skills with a lightsaber, and he would never win a contest with the Force, so he made sure Sidious was trapped inside of the castle. Dozens of Magna Guards, fresh off the assembly line, were situated inside of Castle Sereno. Palpatine fought with fury and his blades. While the guards were no match, they provided the perfect cover for Dooku, so that he may kill Sidious. When he landed the killing blow, he did not tell the Jedi. He never wanted them to have the satisfaction. Instead, he had the body burned and the lightsaber confiscated as a trophy. The Sith would die with him and Maul, whoever went first, obviously. Instead of using evil to rule the galaxy, he would use his money. The Trade Federation and other businesses got to Tatooine after Jabba left, but it was nearly too late ironically. Anakin was able to give them factory space, but for the most part, his promises inside the Senate were empty-handed. In all fairness, and they realized this, his promises weren't really for Tatooine, but the Outer Rim. Anakin played on their emotions, which is why veteran Senator Anaconda Farr was so necessary for writing his backup plans and speeches. Without Anaconda, this would have never gotten this far. They used emotion to swing them against Palpatine, not logic, and logic was only as good as greed inside the Senate during the rule of Palpatine. The corporations did find home and they did turn a profit on Tatooine, just not the margins they were looking for. However, more opportunities would continue supplying them, with new planets from around the Outer Rim wanting their shot at a position within the Republic. Supreme Chancellor Rabish had bitten off more than he could chew, but he used what he could to make everything work. It wouldn't be easy, but that wasn't what public service was. For years, this continued. Skywalker remained the semi-permanent face of Tatooine, while the governors continued getting fed in and out of the system. Former slaves like himself were pursuing education, joining factories ran by the Federation, and going to work at the all-inclusive tourist destination and casino on the other side of the planet, not to mention the pod racing circuit that had gained galactic attention. Infrastructure on Tatooine was the most radical change that happened on the planet after the Hutt cartel was scared off. Anakin bartered with the Trade Federation. They needed to place a fleet of 3 Lucrehulks over the planet as a defense force and trade protector if they wanted to have factories on the system. This was agreed upon by both sides, mostly the people of Tatooine, because they had been given a scare when the Eridu security force left. Not a big deal, but a fleet of Hutt forces arrived, and thanks to some old Hammerhead corvettes, a Krillin battlecruiser, and some N1s, they scared off the Hutts without a fight. Since then, Supreme Chancellor Rabish had found profit in the war against the Syndicate, so the Republic went in after them, and the Hutts paid dearly. Their territory was down to 1 planet, and once that was gone, they'd be done for. Infrastructure-wise, Tatooine grew into the sky. They made sure that buildings were taken care of, and they started a new project to test out domes on Tatooine, similar to what they had on Mandalore. It was a bit challenging with the 2 suns and everything, but the planet was growing, and that was because of their senator. Skyscrapers littered Mos Espa and Mos Eisley. Places that were once hubs of criminal activity slowly became hubs of hard workers, people building a better planet for the next generation. Everything with the people of Tatooine was accepting that they had it hard, but refusal to make for a better world for those that came after them was complacency that earned slugs like Jabba power. This was a generational refusal to give in to such fallacies. Anakin and Padme continued working together, and while he was friendly with the Federation on Tatooine, she and he and the delegation of 2000 were working dedicatedly to remove the Federation from representation within the Senate. The delegation wanted more regulation on the Federation because of the monopolization, and thankfully, oh so thankfully, Chancellor Rabish had an actual backbone. He had made millions off the Federation, and that was good, but he did not sell his soul to them. They had done him well in the war against the syndicates, but that era was coming to an end. Regulations were passed, and with the delegation of 2000, the corporate conglomerates lost their influence within the Senate body itself. Due to spending so much time together on Coruscant, Naboo, and Tatooine, Anakin and Padme started dating, and eventually, when he was 25 and she was 30, they tied the knot. It was a slowly building fire that burned unlike any other. Friends to lovers was quite the trip, and despite representing different planets, they made it work. In the decades following their marriage, Skywalker would have finished his life's work, the first dome of Tatooine. It was built over Mos Espa. Just outside the dome was the new and improved raceway for the Boonta Eve Classic. Anakin's champion banner was still hung in the Hall of Champions. The facilities were all updated, and the planet truly reflected change. Anakin and Padme were happily in their 40s. Padme was finished with her career and had moved to Tatooine to live inside the first dome. It was gorgeous. A second one was being built for Mos Espa and a couple other minor ones for other cities. Inside the domes, plant life ruled, and there was even an integration program for Tuskens that wanted to assimilate into regular life. Emphasis on their personal want. It was never forced on them. Anakin and Padme by this point had their 3 children. The first was a daughter named Leia, the second was a boy named Luke, and the last was a daughter named Issachar. A big, happy family. Shmi was a grade school teacher, and Klieg, Owen, and Beru had changed practices after making a fortune off of an Anakin-passed legislation for the Moisture Farm Union, which still ran all of Tatooine's water supply. A total union without business oversight, and it was brilliant. The Skywalker children would aspire to be like their parents in many ways. And while at this point there was a chance for Anakin to become a chancellor, he decided against it. He thought the opportunity was good, but in his one chance to just rise above the political ranks to become Supreme Chancellor, he chose his family, remaining the Senator of Tatooine. His apprentice was a young girl. She was also a former slave too, and he was teaching her how to run his position, because when he was finished there was no one other than her that'd be good enough for the role, in his mind at least. Anakin's generosity also brought the Jedi to Tatooine, which is why they were there and so prevalent in the destruction of the crime syndicate system. Their outpost inside of Mos Eisley was a true aid to the locals, and their positioning helped them move off-world to assist the Republic in other operations. When Anakin retired, there would be Jubilee. He had earned himself the title of Tatooine's finest son. He had earned respect from Dooku before he passed away, of a natural death. He had unintentionally brought balance to the Force. He had helped bring the system of the Republic back from the dead, and he had found his happiness. That surprisingly, all coming to him because he stole Master Yoda's cane. And that, my friends, is our wholesome PP story. Again, special thanks to our patrons! Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Groot36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, Angel Dust, Alexandra Reese, The Beginning and End, Django Fat Clone, Nick 5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Gallivan Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sirwell 1767, Darth Revan, Granity Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo Weewoo 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny Naguin, Save the Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Young Lisa 66, Madman Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, 466 Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, many of their first names, Darkscene46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button, support me in other ways, go check out the things, Penti Patrol Cinema, Patreon, whatever. Let's talk about this story. Whoa, that was crazy. Do you like that? I did. I had a lot of fun writing this. This was one of those stories kind of like the Luke and Leia saving Padme story, where I had a lot of fun kind of talking about this landscape and changing it up and giving Anakin this motivation. I really like the idea of having Anakin do it unintentionally or just going in there on a whim and being shown up, being laughed out of the Senate, and then being like so stubborn that he's like, all right, I gotta get this right. I cannot be laughed out because I am better than all of you kind of thing. And I think that motivation of being stubborn would really be a pushing factor for him. I do believe there are other ways that this story could have gone, with him taking on the Syndicate, or taking on Palpatine, or taking on this, that, or the other. But this story desperately needed to be focused on Tatooine. Without him actually going against Jabba or going against the criminal syndicates without support from the Republic, I don't think this story works. And so that, for me, is why I focused entirely on his developmental side into Senator of Tatooine, instead of him fighting the Clone Wars as a Senator. I think this fits him narratively much better. But I hope you all enjoyed the story. This was a ton of fun for me. I think this is going to make the top 15. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.